South Korea has been an independent country since 1948. It is the 10th biggest economy in the world, with advanced sectors in shipbuilding, cars and electronics. Its $50 billion military budget ranks number 10 in the world, and with over 500,000 active troops and 3 million reserves, it's one of the largest militaries around. It has powerful ground forces, a strong air force, and is building up an ocean-going navy. But, unlike other independent countries, South Korea does not command its own military. In fact, it has not had control since 1950. How did this happen? Now in 1950, when the Korean War broke out, a United Nations command was set up to take control over all military forces that were fighting on the side of South Korea. This included the United States, the UK, Australia, Canada, and several other countries. A U.S. general was put in charge, General Douglas MacArthur. After the war ended 3 years later in 1953, operational control over the South Korean military shifted from a UN command to a United States command. In 1978, a Combined Forces Command was set up in which the United States was still firmly in control. Then, in 1994, Washington finally agreed to give back peacetime operational control. But in times of war, the South Korean armed forces remain under U.S. command, and they take orders from a U.S. four-star general. This arrangement remains in place to this day. So what does the operational command structure look like? Well, the Combined Forces Command, that was established in 1978, consists of 14 sections. Each of them has a chief and a deputy. Now in 6 of them, a South Korean serves as chief, and the US officer is the deputy. These sections are personnel, intelligence, communications, engineer, operational analysis, and headquarter command. The remaining 8 sections fall under US control with the Korean deputy. These sections are Commander-in-Chief, Chief of Staff, Planning, Operations, Logistics, Judge Advocate, Public Affairs, and Secretary Combined Staff. The overall commander of the Combined Forces Command is a 4-star US Army general. A South Korean general is his deputy. Now the obvious question is, why did South Korea agree to all of this? Well, after the Korean War, South Korea was in no position to say no. Its military and economy were severely damaged. They were vulnerable and they knew it. But why in 1953 did the United States want to keep operational control over South Korea's military? The major reason is that at that time, the United States was engaged in a Cold War with the Soviet Union and China, and the containment strategy that the United States had chosen was a military one, and the goal had become to surround the Soviets and the Chinese with as many military bases as possible. South Korea was thus a useful piece in a grand geopolitical chess game. Now ever since then, there have been numerous attempts by the South Korean government to get wartime operational control back in their hands. But all these attempts have failed. At one point, an agreement was made to transfer control to South Korea on April 17, 2012. This date was delayed by Obama to 2015, after which it was cancelled again, to an undefined time when, according to the US government, the security environment of South Korea is stable and secure enough for a transition. When this will be is anyone's guess, but it is clear that Washington is reluctant to give it up, even though successive Korean governments have made it clear they want their own military back. But why, after the Cold War ended so many decades ago, does the United States still insist to keep wartime operational control? Now there seem to be 2 reasons. The first one is North Korea, which is still a threat to the South. But in recent years another reason has become much more important, and that is China. The United States has decided to use a military containment strategy against China. As they did against the Soviet Union, the goal now is to surround a Cold War adversary with as many military bases as possible. US strategists talk about island chains that are supposed to contain China, to keep it boxed in behind a wall of US military might. South Korea is an important component, just like Japan, Okinawa, Guam, and other such places. But the US presence in South Korea goes much further than just operational control over South Korea's military. The United States itself has over 28,000 military forces in South Korea, Spread out over dozens of military bases, these make up the following units: the 8th Army, which includes the 2nd Infantry Division, the 210th Field Artillery Brigade, the 23rd Chemical Battalion, a Combat Aviation Brigade with attack helicopters, the 7th Air Force, including the 8th Fighter Wing and the 51st Fighter Wing, and US Naval Forces. All these forces are part of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, which is one of the 6 geographic combatant commands defined by the Department of Defense. The Indo-Pacific Command has designated China to be the main long-term strategic rival and threat. It is in this context that they want US forces in South Korea, and to also have control over the South Korean military. Now, as long as the United States maintains wartime operational control, South Korea is not a truly independent country. This has been the argument of multiple South Korean presidents. For South Korea, this can in fact be very dangerous, because Washington would like nothing more than to use South Korea as a shield or fist against China. But when a war against China does break out, and if South Korea gets involved fighting on the US side, they face serious danger. And it is likely that in such a scenario, South Korea's territory will experience destruction on a much larger scale than the United States, which is located much further away. For these and other reasons, South Korea will gain much if it gets back control. It would mark the end of a strange situation in which a sovereign country is not allowed to command its own troops.